We're having a little bit of a different conversation today. We're having a little bit of a different sermon in the way that we're doing this today. And the reason that we're doing this is because as elders, we had a beautiful conversation on Wednesday, elders and intern. And it was so important that I just felt like we needed to bring it into our community. And it's a tough conversation. It's not an easy one to have, but it's an important conversation. And if we don't have tough conversations as a church and in the church, then we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing. You know, it's so on my heart. We can't just come into these doors and do our religious acts of duty and then walk out and live life just separate. Everything is sacred. So it's not just sacred in here, it's sacred out there. And God invites us into being church, not doing church or going to church. It's being church. So Henry Nouwen says this: we cannot profess our solidarity with those who are oppressed when we're unwilling to confront the oppressor. We can't profess our solidarity with those who are oppressed when we're not even willing to have the conversation. We can't profess our solidarity with those who are oppressed when we just walk away and don't even look at it and pretend like it's not happening or listen. Neil Donald Walsh says this: yearning for the new way will not produce it. Only ending the old way can do that. You cannot hold on to the old all the while declaring that you want something new. The old will defy the new. The old will deny the new. The old will decry the new. There is only one way to bring in the new. You must make room for it. And even as I say that, Terry, one of our elders, was sitting there today, and she goes, I have this image. When you're rearranging a room or making a room, redoing it, redecorating it, she goes, sometimes we just try to add things in or move the room around. She goes, when you really want to do it new, you got to get rid of all the stuff, start over, clean the room. So we're kind of starting over in many ways, even in this conversation that we're bringing in here. So today is about cleansing the temple. And the text both informed me of what I wanted to do this morning, but culture did as well, by what was going on. And they matched so beautifully that, you know, when I started this, what I usually do in preparing for a sermon is I do an exegesis, I parse the words, I look at the Greek, I look at the Hebrew, I look at what needs to be done. But this week, I sat with it. And I sat with the text and our culture, and I went, what is the now? And so this is the journey we're taking. I'm not going to read the text, I'm going to show the text. So we're going to show you, because it was so well done, and they took it out of John, and they stayed right with the text. So this morning, I'm going to let the drama show the text.
It was almost time for the Passover festival, so Jesus went to Jerusalem. Temple, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and pigeons. and also the money changers sitting at their tables. Whip from cords and drove all the animals out of the temple, both the sheep and the cattle. He overturned the tables of the money changers and scattered their coins. And he ordered those who sold pigeons,
take them out of here! Stop making my father's house a marketplace!
His disciples remembered that the scripture says, "My devotion to your house, O God, burns in me like a fire." The Jewish authorities came back at him with a question.
What miracle can you perform to show us that you have the right to do this? Tear down this temple, and in 3 days I will build it again.
Are you going to build it again in 3 days?
It has taken 46 years to build this temple.
But the temple Jesus was speaking about was his body. So when he was raised from death, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and what Jesus had said. While Jesus...
Did you feel his anger? His just rage at the injustice. And John doesn't say that he made a cord of 3 strands, but Matthew, Mark, and Luke do. So before we get to the conversation, I want to lay a groundwork. I want to lay some context. For those who may not know, the temple was the center of Jewish life. And the temple was to be a symbol of God's desire to commune with God's own people. There's another part that I cannot talk about, but I have to add in one sentence. The temple was not God's plan. It was humankind's plan. It was mankind's plan. God's plan was to commune. He said to build a tent that it would represent him being able to move among his people. Solomon made the choice to build a permanent structure. But God being God worked within our system, right? So if you were to ask any ancient Israelite to tell you the most important place on earth, their answer would be the temple. It was the hub of their relationship with God. It was a sacred place where the priests would enter into God's presence on behalf of the community and offer sacrifices, offer praise. It was to be this place of communion. It was supposed to be a connection. It was supposed to be a house of prayer. And Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record Jesus as saying, "A house will be called a house of prayer in this moment, but you have made it a den of thieves." Now that prayer word in the Hebrew is palau, and that means tent peg. And palau prayer was a means of attaching yourself to God. And in the same way a tent peg establishes a tent and fastens it securely, so palau prayer fastens the soul to God. Isn't that good? So this temple was to be a place where the community fastened itself to God. So Matthew 21 also records and adds in that after he cleansed the temple, he didn't leave. He actually stayed and healed the blind, the lame, who weren't allowed in the temple because they were unclean. So he was making another statement about the temple. It is a place of healing. It was to be a place of connection. It was to be a place of fellowship. Only John talks about turning my Father's house into a market. And the what miraculous sign can you give us and destroy this temple and I'll raise it up. I'm not going to get to that probably today because I want to have this conversation. Second thing, there is no evidence, and this is by D.A. Carson, there's no evidence that the animal merchants and money changers or the priestly authorities who allowed them to use the outer courts were corrupt companions and graft. What that means is many people say the reason that Jesus cleansed the temple was because they were cheating everybody out. And that they were doing poor business practices and they were making money. Now, they're not talking about here of selling Girl Scout cookies or playing bingo for purses, or fundraising or things that the church always wants to collapse this to. This is what it was. I like bingo. I like bingos for purses, just as an aside, But what this was, it was an attack on the whole of the financial arrangements of the sacrificial system that was never supposed to be. Jesus is railing against a system. He is saying, you have turned this into a marketplace. You have turned a thing where God is to commune with his people. You have turned it into an unjust system of profiteering, of making money. That's what he's railing. The sacrificial system that God instituted was to be from your own first fruits. It was to be from what you brought. And if you notice, he went after the dove the dove people the most, the dove merchants, because doves were to be the sacrifices of those who could not afford lambs. So he specifically is going after the dove traders. And he's saying, you are doing this to the impoverished and to the poor and to those who have less. So it would be like an usher standing at the door and us making a decision. We're not going to help anybody unless they tithe 10% or more, and we set up ushers to stand at the door and check people's paychecks, pay stubs, and prove that you are tithing, or else you can't come in. It would be like that comparable to today. That's what he was railing against. The priests were making money off of a sacrificial system. So what I began to think about was systems of injustice that we see in our world. And it was not lost on me that Jesus is yelling at the merchants, but he is yelling at the Pharisees. And then what I began to think about was, where am I Pharisaical? What is happening in our world here? What unjust systems am I a part of that I ignore? I walk away from because I can. Where I live into my privilege and ignore when there are others that might be hurt me. Where am I Pharisaical? And as I began to think about this, the Pharisees, by allowing this to go on, were complicit in the sin. So where am I allowing injustices to go on? And it's all of us. It's not just me, but it's all of us. And when I think about this place of fellowship that was turned into a marketplace, into a system for profit. And I began to think about our culture. I began to think about the complicity of the church when the first nation, our American Indians' land was being taken. And the church stood by and did nothing. As a matter of fact, the church joined in. And they went into these tribes and they took them out from their people group and they began to teach them in the name of God. And I think about the slavery against black and brown bodies for profit, for commerce. Couldn't run a plantation without the exploitation. I'm reading a book now that I just learned that it was against gynecology and C-sections were developed on black slave bodies without anesthesia. That's what gynecology got. All of its know-how. The father of gynecology did all of his learning on black slave bodies. And the church stood by and watched and perpetuated it. Because there it is in the Bible. And then I think about women being seen as objects and second-class citizens. And the church stood by and watched it and perpetuated it and continues it even to today. And then I think even now, immigration on our border is happening now. What do you do? What am I doing? How am I complicit in this? And these are all tough questions. And then finally now, what's happening this week regarding George Floyd. And at the same time that George Floyd's killer's verdict was coming to pass, there was a 15-year-old girl being shot by 3 white policemen. And she called them for help. And what is the church doing? And when you listen to any kind of news programs, talking heads, you hear this wrestling of trying to make it okay. Even with George Floyd, trying to make it okay by saying he was a drug addict or what have you. And as I was looking at this, even for my own self, I was saying, what am I doing as a representative of the church? And for me, as I sat and meditated on this, and the complicity of the Pharisees, and the complicity of me as a person of privilege in education, in the color of my skin, in my socioeconomic status, what am I doing? And as God does, what I heard the whisper of, what's that in your hand? This. My voice. This. Opening the conversation. Here. With my friends. And you know, as God only does it, I went to the doctor on this week, and they started talking about this whole situation and taking an opposite stance of mine. And I'm like, oh. And I could hear James' voice in my head, because James is the one who says this to me. He goes, my mother always told me, don't get in the foxhole with somebody who can climb out. And I had the decision. Am I going to be complicit? Or am I going to stand up and say, I disagree with you, doctor? And I had to speak. And I had to share. So today, I wanted you to hear the voices that we were so gifted with hearing on Wednesday in the elder meeting, to share what it is for these beautiful bodies to experience what is going on in our world today. And and the system that we all live in. And we could listen to their beautiful voices. Whoever wants to go first.
They're all looking at you, Jay. Sorry.
Well, good morning again. I'm going to try to get through mine pretty, well, there's two pieces to this. There's one one part that I shared, and one part as I think about going forward. So, and the reason I think about what is the part about going forward is because I see on my timeline and a lot of other places that the people that I saw hurting so badly over the last couple of weeks starting to recover. And I didn't want to take them back into that place where they were just in such great anguish. Right? We're still in the same situation, but somehow they're recovering. We're still in a situation where at least, one African American is killed by a police officer every day. We're averaging 3. That's where we are in the United States today. I shared with the team on Wednesday just about a pity party that I had. And in that party, I thought about my life. I thought about my education. So as of next month, I'll have 3 degrees, 1 bachelor's, 2 masters. Those come from schools, everything from state schools to Ivy League. I have traveled the world. My passport is completely full. Just about every continent on the world I've been to. I was driving in today and I was thinking, wow, I've had the opportunity to learn and to forget 2 languages. But none of that means a thing when I get pulled over. None of it. It is yes sir, no sir, like everybody else. It is put your hands behind your back like everybody else. Doesn't matter how I'm dressed. That is my experience. And in the middle of that, my son had taken my wife to get her car repaired, so he parked in a different spot. And I'm in this mindset, right? I've really been in this pity party. And I look outside, his car is gone. I panicked. Everything I feared in my life was now happening. Meaning, I wake up one morning and my child, who I've trained to do the right things, it does not matter. If there's one thing I can get you to understand in this skin, when I am out there, none of what I do matters. It does not matter. And after I was finished thinking about my own party, I thought about the mothers of black children. Because as try as I might, as a father, there's something different in the emotional connection than a mother and a child. That there was a pain that I watched my mother go through that my father couldn't go through. And so I thought of these ladies. And I thought of all of the ladies who are in interracial relationships that have black children. I thought of all the women who adopt black children and what they were feeling. And I said to God, why do they have to suffer so? Why then go through this moment of terror? And I don't use that word lightly. There's a terroristic moment that come across them when their child is not where they're supposed to be. And I said, what can I do? What can I do? And so that's where I'm left in terms of the trauma that I shared with the team on Wednesday. But this is what I want to share since that ask of God and others have asked of me then is, James, what do we do? How do we get out of this? And the thought that came to my mind is this, and this is not for the person who thinks they already have the answer. Go get a cup of coffee, put it on mute. This is not for you. Because this is real, right? I was in a panic like I've never felt before. And people are trying to help, and they're trying to say, what do we do? And so for that group, I want you to be reminded that the Bible tells us as Christians, we are one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one body, one blood. We are one. And as so, the Bible also tells us there's this connection between our experience here on earth and that of heaven. Right? So there's some kind of connection. And then it tells us, as believers, the things that we bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and the things that we loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Think about that as you think about the situation we're going through right now on earth. So I imagine if you got to heaven, and everybody in heaven is supposed to be there, and this kind of mess is happening. How could that be? But we're one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one blood, one body. Jesus then tells us, if you don't imagine that happening in heaven, Jesus tells us when you pray, pray, thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on this day. Because there's too much pain on this earth, this day. And I don't want you just to pray. We have a unique opportunity as a diverse body in Cornerstone Christian Fellowship. It creates certain tensions, but it also creates certain opportunities for us to learn and for us to do different, for us to do better, for us to show better. So I ask for you that if you love me, that as you walk through the temples of your life and you see people erecting tables of bigotry, of erecting tables of misogyny, of homophobia, of racism, turn them over. And if you can't turn them over, you don't love me. You don't love me. You're religious. You don't love me. If you can't turn this table over, if you can't stop that conversation, if you don't step in. Because in that video, if you pay attention, there's also the scribes and Pharisees, Jesus' disciples. But there's another audience. That's the people. The people who were there to buy the doves that were being oppressed. They were watching what Jesus would do. And guess what? They're watching you. Those are my thoughts for this week.
You know, something that we did on during the elder meeting was just to pause and soak in. Because church, we're trained to grab it up here. And then we leave and we have done our religious, intellectual calisthenics. So let's pause and let's, what James has shared, let's let it soak in for a moment. That's a part of carrying one another's burdens, is feeling what they feel as the body. And I also want to speak to the possibility of an elephant in the room, and it's this. When we are in positions of privilege, we don't have to have these conversations or listen to them. And part of white fragility is we get uncomfortable with listening. We get uncomfortable with entering into a new conversation. We get uncomfortable with hearing this intensity or emotion. We want to step out of it and stay with it. Stay with the emotion. Don't run. Lean into the suffering. Lean into the voices that you're hearing. Lean into the discomfort of the conversation. Just lean into it and sit in it.
Good morning. I just come before you. Got it. Yeah, I just come to share because it was just interesting even being able to be in an elders meeting and this conversation come up and we actually dealt with it. So I really appreciate you, Pastor Tracy, for that. I think about this because I go way back to my middle school days, many years ago. But I always felt there was something wrong with the Pledge of Allegiance. So therefore, I became rebellious, and I would not stand up and do it. And they always tried to, make me stay for detention and all that craziness. And it was all because of justice for all. Even in 7th grade, I never felt like it was justice for all. Went to mostly, was very few black people in our schools, and I just could not understand why everybody was so engrossed with that justice for all. I never felt equal. I did my first march on the courthouse steps when I was 13 because they wouldn't hire black people in the banks in Westchester. Crazy. This time around when I talked with a few people in the church and they're like, Miss Cindy, are you going to march? I said, no, I'm tired of marching. You white people get out there and march, because that's the only thing that's going to change this thing. I think about my son who is in prison doing time. I think about my husband who I got permission from him to share, spent 13 years in prison. I met him when he was in a halfway house. And I just thought about, man, you didn't even kill anybody and you got all that time for that? And not only that, he had to stay on. I met him in 85. He didn't get off of parole till 2002. And I remember being at the courthouse with him in Delaware, and it was just like a feather was lifted off of his shoulders. And I do thank God for allowing me to meet him because I couldn't have picked a better husband. And most people would have ran from, you're actually talking to somebody that came out of prison? And I make a joke out of everything. I said, yeah, I'll catch him at the halfway house. You still got some hope. So that's who I am. But when I looked at my husband, we sat there and watched that verdict together. And I said, tell me how you feel about that. And he said, I go back to that Sam Cooke song, A Change Is Coming. I can't imagine spending that much time in prison. I spent overnights in the lockup, but nothing to that extent. And just to hear him say a change is going to come. I have a son in prison. And I thought, well, I know they're all happy. I thought that for a moment. The next moment I was thinking, I need to be in prayer for him more now because he's up there where the guards are racist. And because they heard the verdict, I can imagine some awful stuff happening. So, and just being a volunteer at the prison here and haven't been able to get in, I see how they treat people. I had to call a few officers out. I didn't care if they didn't let me come back or not. but you're not going to do that in front of my face. You know? So we all do have a part to play. And I just ask everybody to really dig deep in your soul and see what it is that you can do. Because we all can play a part. I was prejudiced for many years. I quit my job at the college because I was like, I got to get away from these white people because somebody's going to get killed. Now, seriously. So I had to do that for my own sanity and find myself. Hell, I'm sitting in a church of like Cornerstone. It's like God knows, he knew what I needed when I needed it. And I thank him for that. And I can't be any more happier now than sitting in the most segregated hour on a Sunday morning and we're talking, having this conversation. So I know it's God. But I just encourage you all just to continue to dig deep in your soul because there is something you can do. And I don't care if it's just to write a letter to a prisoner or say hi to somebody black in the street because it all does make a difference. God bless.
Again, let's just soak in what she shared. We have to ask ourselves, am I putting up walls right now? Am I unwilling to let go of my own paradigms? Tony's been saying this for about a month now. It's not our perspective that's the problem. It's our attachment to it. If you're uncomfortable with the conversation, ask yourself why. That's what I mean by leaning into it. We have to learn to listen. Whether we agree or not, we have to learn to listen.
Hello, everybody. My husband, James, is amazing, and I don't even really know what to say. And we have Miss Cindy, who is a powerhouse and keeps it so very real. So, I don't know. But I want to kind of piggyback off of what Pastor Tracy was saying, and that is, if you are uncomfortable, and maybe you in the room aren't, but maybe someone watching on the Facebook Live is, if you are uncomfortable, why? What is it that you're afraid of? Maybe you're saying, well, I got problems too. Well, my child is in jail too. Or I did drugs too. Or I got stopped by the police too. So what's the big deal? Everybody has stuff. I'm not privileged. My family was poor. We were on welfare. That's not an excuse. None of those are excuses. And none of those are reasons for you to ignore what a whole race of people. And I know that, and Pastor Tracy talked about immigration, and she talked about LGBTQ, and she talked about, just poverty and social economic injustice. But you know who everybody quotes when they want to talk about justice? Martin Luther King Jr. You know what movement everybody wants to point to when they want to talk about equality for all and justice for all and civil rights? The Black Civil Rights Movement. Why is that? Why is that? Might it have to do with we are like the ones who are most obviously and most often, always, everywhere we go on this planet, the ones who are the most oppressed? The one who every race says, well, at least I'm not black. At least I'm not black. What does that say to you? And so we had a moment, was that Wednesday or Tuesday? Wednesday. We had a moment when we could breathe. When in every one of these moments that have happened, you hear our fellows saying, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. We have been holding our breath. Certainly since May 25th, 2020, but really since 1619 when the first slaves were brought to America. We have been holding our breath, hoping that one day we could breathe. And people say to us, well, if you would just do, if you would just be, if you would have done this instead of that, that wouldn't have happened, right? It does not matter, as James said. We jump over into this hoop, it still happens. We run over here, it still happens. It doesn't matter where we go or what we do. So we put the challenge to you. The only reason I'm up here today is because I feel like I have an obligation. And some of my friends don't feel this way. I feel I have an obligation to say something to you that might help you, that might open your eyes, that might make you go, huh. But really, we are so exhausted. And it won't change until you change it. We have marched, we have died, we have voted, we have fought for every kind of right there is. And we've had marginal success. I had a friend say to me, well, isn't it better now? Sure, it's better, but is it right? Is it right if 2 seconds after a police officer gets out of a car, a black man is dead? But you can see video after video of white people slinging axes and knives and cussing and spitting on police, and they get taken peacefully into custody? Is it right? Yes, I live out here in Westchester with all the white people. But I still am terrified when a police vehicle is up behind me. Yeah, I am. I still, and just so you guys know at home, all the black people in the room are shaking, nodding their heads yes. I still am so afraid and tell my children, and I've kind of given up on telling them because I don't know. Do I tell them to put their hands on the dash? Do I tell them to put their hands in the air? Do I tell them to put their hands out the window? Do I tell them to move slowly? Do I tell them to speak up the way any other person would and say, why are you arresting me? Because all of that can end in death, and it has for so many of us. As you've heard and you're going to continue to hear, it's really not on us to change it. It's really on you to open your eyes, to step out of your comfort zone, to not be afraid. We learned about scarcity and abundance a couple of years ago through a preaching sermon. And all of that fear is out of fear of losing power, fear of losing your place in the world, fear of, I don't know, I have no idea, I don't know. But there is room for all of us. God's sky is vast. It does not end. So God doesn't have a pie. He has a sky. And all of us can look up and have a piece of that sky. All of us can look up and see, I want that place, or I want that place. And down here on earth, all of us can see that. There is enough for everybody. And it is our own selfishness and greed that forces us or makes us go into these crazy places. And we don't have to be that way. So we are all challenging you. We all love you, and we know you love us. But as Jesus taught us, love comes at a price. There is some sacrifice to it. I hope you'll make the sacrifice. Thank you.
Hang on. Let's pause for 1 minute. You know, I didn't know or ask what any of the elders were going to share. And the reason was because I wanted their emotion and their truth and their experience. And I know I've said this 100 times already, and to lean into that. You know, I've spent the summer, last summer, and I still am doing it, reading all kinds of authors. I read, the history of white people. And race is truly a construct. It is truly a social construct. And it's dominated in the Western culture, primarily. But it is a global thing. I mean, James and I were talking about on Friday, the Aboriginal people and their land being taken. You know, humanity has a propensity to choose who is going to be the one that is going to be exploited. And the church has a propensity to watch and to perpetuate it. I don't want to be a church that perpetuates it. I don't want to be a church where we come in, sing Kumbaya, say Psalm 23, make everybody feel good, and let's go home. I want to be a church where, not for the sake of sensationalism, but for the sake of truth, making us feel uncomfortable. And in the books, as I was reading this summer, and I've read quite a number of them, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, a doctor from Vietnam who stood with communism, just paradigms that were not my own, to try to understand this is real. This is real. And unless we live in a black body, we don't understand. But it's real. It's real. And if we're going to be the church, we must do everything we can. We have on our website a Black Lives Matter tab, that if you want to know more about that. But there's also, as Janice said, those that are being oppressed because of their gender identity or who they fall in love with. There are those that are being oppressed because they're immigrants, because they're displaced people. There are those that are being oppressed because of their socioeconomic status. I'm not saying we grab it all. I'm saying we ask the Lord which one we need to speak into.
Hello, everyone. So this week I was sitting and thinking about my military career. So yesterday I hit 18 years in the military. And so for me, like James said, it doesn't matter what you do. It's like it's never enough. We can move to another neighborhood and guess what? White flight. They're gonna leave. And this past weekend, I had to take on the first sergeant role again, and a lot of my soldiers couldn't understand why I didn't want that role. And it's not because I'm afraid of responsibility, it's because about 5 years ago, I was a first sergeant in Illinois for 5 years. And I experienced the most racist time of my life at that unit. I had a commander that just because I was a black female, he wanted someone else, a white soldier, a white male, to be his first sergeant, that they went after my career just to try to put him in that position. I went through so much with that unit, calling my mom almost every day because I couldn't even leave. If I wrote a soldier up, then I'm getting an IG complaint because I'm counseling a soldier for doing something wrong, but because they're white and I'm black, and they don't like the fact that I'm in charge, then it's a problem. So at that time, I said, I don't even want to be in the military anymore because I can't even do my job. And doing my job has people coming after my career just to do my job. So when I was in San Antonio about 2 years ago, I got selected for Master Sergeant, which I am now. And they said, well, the only position that we have is back in Bartonville, Illinois. And the sergeant major called me personally to tell me, and I said, well, I will decline or go back to being a civilian. Because of the trauma that I dealt with at that unit, I said I would never go back. Even if it means not getting promoted, my mental health meant that much to me that I wouldn't go back to that type of environment. So he decided, he said, well, I'll give you one more option. I'm gonna send you to Pennsylvania. My next thought then was, yeah, I know. I come down here to visit my cousins about 2 hours ago, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know if that's going to be a good environment for me, but they convinced me, and here I am. But I sit and I think, I had a soldier come to me last weekend. They gave me the rating scheme of who I'll be rating in this new position. And he says, I said, well, why wasn't the first sergeant rating these soldiers before? And he said, well, because they're black. And I said, so they can't rate because they're black? And he said, yeah, because they're the good old boy club and they're scared of the retaliation if they give these black people bad ratings. So yet again, they were making me rate these soldiers because they didn't want to deal with if they got backlash. And that's here today. And I sit and I think about my nephews who, they went through this phase of every time, my nephew has a complex now, he likes to grow his hair out, but every time my sister tells me he has to cut it because at the end of the day, he can't be himself. My other nephew has locks, but because of the impression that it would give, if he's walking down the street, they have to dress a certain way, they can't be themselves. Every time I drive back home to Alabama and I have to go through South Carolina and see the Confederate flags flying, I don't stop for hours because I know that if I stop, I'm going to be in a white town and I'm the only black person there and I don't even know if I'm going to make it out. that's still here today. We got soldiers that are supposed to risk my life for. I've been on 5 deployments. And at the time I was in that unit in Illinois, I got soldiers' families coming to me saying, hey, bring my soldier home. And at the time, the Mike Brown shooting happened right before we went overseas. And I saw the reality of these white soldiers who didn't understand, who's protesting and don't understand why the black people would tear up a city. And hearing all these comments, and their parents and their spouses is coming to me saying, bring my child home, and I can't even trust your child to protect me while I'm overseas. But that's what they expect from us. They expect us to go to work every day, make the money for the white people, and then be oppressed every day. And that's what we do. But if we get arrested, that's on us. Like I was telling the elders, I got a brother who went to jail in 2000 for an attempted robbery and spent 15 years. They gave him 25 to life on an attempted robbery. But my thing with, they got a verdict. But my thing is when they have the sentencing, how much time is this guy going to get? Because we see it all the time. Like Miss Cindy said, they'll kill somebody and get 5 years. But then you got people like my brother spending 15 plus years over an attempted robbery, and he's still on parole even to this day. That don't mean, I condone what he did, but sometimes with black people, their crimes don't make sense for the punishment that they get. Even here in Westchester, I've gotten pulled over several times. Even one time with my best friend driving and my sister in the car, and they wanted to see everybody's license, and I'm like, when did we start having to show license for people in the back seat? Right. Or every time it's like, well, you got Texas plates and, Missouri license. Okay, now you're making excuses, but I never got a ticket. There was never a reason or a logical explanation for why I got pulled over. And yes, it's scary to get in your car and drive in a white neighborhood and think you're going to be safe or you're going to make it home. That's our reality. That is not just something we're watching on TV. We're not just enraged. And if you get upset, then you're the angry black woman. But if we protest, it's a problem. If we do it peacefully, it's a problem. If we make a t-shirt, it's a problem. What do we supposed to do besides just sit around and be oppressed? My only idea is it starts at home. It starts with teaching your kids. Kids don't just come out the womb being prejudiced. But they're learning it from their home, their environments, the people that you allow them to associate themselves with. So that's about all I can suggest, because I've just literally been in a tunnel vision, because it's like I don't even want to feel the reality, because it's like everything that we do, we've been doing this marching and protesting for years and years, and we're making progress, but at the end of the day, y'all creating this next generation doing the same thing. So until you sit down with your kids and teach them, then that generation is going to keep cycling itself over and over again.
I just want to add, and again, just taking it in, and taking the emotion in, and taking the frustration in, and taking the pain in. I'm reading a book right now called Begin Again, written by a professor at Princeton. And it's about James Baldwin, who was a voice at the same time of Martin Luther King during the civil rights, a little before and a little after. And he's writing about why the Black Panthers came into being. And the Black Panthers stood against Martin Luther King and James Baldwin, and they did not like their loving, peaceful ideology. But the reason that they came, that the Black Panthers were formed was because of the amount of black and brown bodies that were being killed by the police. And their cry was, this has got to stop. And so their answer was for them to pick up arms. Now, I'm not making a comment on that being right or wrong. What I'm making the comment on is that was in the 50s. That was in the 60s. And we are in 2021. And we're still dealing with the same problem.
Can I say, did you know that the first gun laws, I think James told me this, the first gun laws were enacted because the Black Panthers decided to pick up arms?
Yes.
That's when the first gun laws were enacted.
Yes.
Not because, it was too much to have guns in this day and time, but because Black people got the guns down. Oh my gosh, they're going to kill us all.
Yes.
And we really don't, I'm sorry, Val, we really don't want to kill anybody. Honestly, we really don't even. Okay.
Except for Cindy.
Except for Cindy. Really, we just want to live. That's all. We really, honestly, if anybody can love, if anybody can say that God is real, is Black people. The fact that we're sitting in this room, in this mixed body, saying we love you. I'm sorry.
So, lots of stuff just been rolling around in my head for some time, just a roller coaster. And I think that a lot of people can relate, no matter, what your background is, what you want your future to be. This has been some crazy roller coaster. Emotionally. And I, like James, have a couple degrees under my belt and do a lot of thinking all my life about legacy, this thing called legacy. What do I want to live? What do I want to leave? Every 5 years I do a plan and an assessment yearly. Is that, am I getting it done? Am I doing it? And I know there's lots of people that do that, but they don't have to do it worrying about justice. They don't have to do it with worrying about crazy opposition based on the color of their skin. They don't have to do it because they're the only one in the crowd. They know, walking into the crowd, the classroom, into the job, they know it's different. Just trust me, it is. But I'm here to say it doesn't have to be. It doesn't need to be. There did not need to even be a trial. There did not need to be a verdict, did not need to be a trial. Did not need to be defense and prosecution lawyers. There did not need to be a neck on a man's throat, a knee on a man's neck. Just did not need to be. And I just, that word decency just has been coming up for me so much lately. Is that decent? Is that good? I heard a lot on Wednesday about how tired. Black people are not monolithic, so you heard a variety of things, but we need to be monolithic about white supremacy. Just saying. It's wrong. We all need to be on one accord about this thing. And so my prayer is that, and my call to action is check your hearts. No matter who you are, where you are on the spectrum of left, right, good, bad, whatever. Check your heart against your head against your heart. I had shared some experiences with police and the justice system that I'm not free to go into detail because I haven't checked that with my husband. I haven't gotten the okay to do that with my husband. But trust me, it's something that never ever leaves you. So as you get to know us for who we are and get to know us and remember that this stuff is, you can't not have an excuse now to not know where we may be coming from. And we sang a song that had the line, "He is good." And aren't we supposed to be like him? Aren't we supposed to be good? So my prayer is that we continue to check ourselves individually. Folks here are tired. We're all tired. We're tired of this. We have no more in us. I feel like I've done everything I was supposed to do. I self-corrected in many cases, or, through blessings from the Lord. Because where would we be without him? And so I just, this is very difficult for me. I did diversity work corporately for some time. And it was all, well, let's put it this way. It was, the black folks were serious, and the white folks were checking boxes, except for one or two who really had a heart. And I know in this church there are folks that have a heart. I just want you to, I hate to say that, get a hammer and pound this thing away so we can all be free and be loved, examples of love. That's all I have to say.
I know we're going a little long today, but it's a conversation that's needed. And, I hope that the people on Facebook Live stayed with us through this. And I just want to read this, and I saw it, somebody posted this on Instagram, and I just thought, oh no, I know who it was. It was, you don't need to know who it was, it doesn't matter why but it says this: do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You're not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. It is a daunting thing, but we're called to love, to listen, to walk with, and to speak. And to ask the Lord, where do you want us to do your justice? And how do you want us to move through your justice? What are you inviting us into? So today I just had to bring it into the church, especially in the text that I had today.